The message arrived on a Tuesday morning in September. Every television screen on Earth displayed the same image at the same moment. A symbol appeared first, a circle surrounded by 47 smaller shapes, each one representing a different species from across the galaxy. Then came the words, translated into every human language simultaneously. The Galactic Council welcomes the species known as humanity. You are invited to join our great union. Daniel Morrison was 43 years old when he became Earth's first ambassador to the stars. He was a quiet man with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent his entire career working in foreign relations. He had negotiated peace treaties between nations and resolved conflicts that seemed impossible to solve. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. He stood before the United Nations General Assembly 1 week after first contact. The room was silent. Every seat was filled. World leaders sat beside each other, their old disagreements suddenly meaningless in the face of something so much larger than any of them had imagined. Daniel read the terms of membership aloud. His voice remained steady even as his hands trembled slightly against the podium. Humanity would join the Galactic Council as a provisional member. This meant they would have limited rights compared to full member species. They could trade with other council members, but only through approved channels. They could access certain technologies, but only those deemed appropriate for a young species. They could colonize new worlds, but only within 3 designated star systems chosen by the Council. Most importantly, humans could not vote on council matters. They would have no voice in decisions that affected the entire galaxy. They would follow rules. They had no part in creating. In exchange, humanity would contribute to the greater good of the Council. Human workers would fill positions on mining colonies and space stations. Human doctors would staff medical facilities along dangerous trade routes. Human engineers would assist with maintenance and construction projects across Council space. The terms were not fair. Everyone in that room understood this. But Daniel Morrison also understood something else. Earth was one small planet in a galaxy filled with thousands of civilizations. Some of those civilizations had traveled between stars for millions of years. Humanity had only just learned to leave their own moon. They had no leverage. They had no power. They had only hoped that things might improve over time. The vote passed unanimously. Humanity accepted membership in the Galactic Council. The first human workers left Earth 6 months later. They traveled aboard Council transport ships to distant stations and colonies scattered across the galaxy. Most of them were young, eager to see the stars, willing to work hard in exchange for the adventure of a lifetime. Kevin Hayes was 22 years old when he joined the Council's diplomatic fleet. He was assigned to a Valorian admiral named Korath, a tall being with blue-gray skin and 4 arms, who commanded a squadron of patrol vessels along the Outer Rim territories. Kevin worked as a junior communications officer, handling routine messages and translations. The Valorians were one of the oldest species in the Council. They have been traveling between stars for 3 million years. They viewed humans the way humans might view clever animals, interesting, but ultimately inferior. Admiral Korath rarely spoke directly to Kevin. When he did, his tone carried the casual dismissiveness of someone addressing a servant rather than a colleague. Kevin accepted this treatment because he had no other choice. He told himself things would change. Humans just needed to prove themselves. His younger sister Natalie followed him into space 2 years later. She was brilliant, a scientist who had earned her doctorate at 24 with groundbreaking research on energy shield technology. The Council assigned her to a research station on the frontier, working under Valorian supervisors who took credit for every discovery her team made. Natalie's name never appeared on the published papers. Her innovations were listed as products of Valorian scientific institutes. When she complained to the station administrator, she was told that provisional members did not receive individual recognition. All contributions belonged to the council as a whole. She stayed anyway. The work mattered more than the credit. At least that was what she told herself during the long nights when frustration kept her awake. Across the galaxy, millions of humans lived similar lives. They worked the dangerous jobs other species refused. They staffed the remote outposts no one else wanted. They fixed the broken systems, healed the wounded soldiers, and built the infrastructure that kept Council civilization running. Human engineers designed better jump drives that cut travel times by 15%. Human doctors developed new treatments for diseases that had plagued Council species for centuries. Human workers extracted rare minerals from asteroid fields, so unstable that automated systems could not function there. The Council accepted these contributions without acknowledgement. Human innovations became Council property. Human sacrifices became statistics in reports that no one read. Human lives became acceptable losses in operations where the real goal was protecting species that actually mattered. 18 years passed this way. Ambassador Daniel Morrison retired after serving 3 terms. He returned to Earth with a heavy heart, knowing he had failed to improve humanity's position in any meaningful way. His replacement, Ambassador Samantha Price, took over with fresh energy and determination. She believed she could change things through persistence and diplomacy. She was wrong, but she did not know it yet. Kevin Hayes rose through the ranks slowly. He was now a lieutenant commander, respected by his human colleagues, but still invisible to the Valorians he served. He had spent almost 2 decades watching his people work twice as hard for half the recognition. Natalie Hayes continued her research on the frontier. Her shield technology had advanced far beyond anything the Council had ever developed. She kept her most important notes in her personal files, a small act of rebellion that she never spoke about to anyone. Both of them felt the same quiet frustration that had spread throughout the human population in Council space. It was not anger, not yet. It was something deeper and more dangerous. It was the slow realization that nothing they did would ever be enough. The Council did not want humanity to succeed. They wanted humanity to serve. The breaking point was coming. No one knew exactly when it would arrive or what form it would take. But somewhere in the vast machinery of galactic civilization, a small crack had formed, and cracks, given enough time, always spread. Telos Station floated in the darkness between 2 star systems, a massive structure that served as a refueling point for Council vessels traveling along the northern trade routes. 3,000 beings lived and worked there, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy. The station was old, but well-maintained, a testament to the engineering skills of the Valorian architects who had designed it centuries ago. The containment failure began at 0347 station time. A small crack in the primary reactor housing went undetected by the automated monitoring systems. By the time alarms started sounding, radioactive coolant was already leaking into the surrounding compartments. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb was asleep in his quarters when his communicator screamed with emergency alerts. He was out of bed and running toward the reactor section within 30 seconds, pulling on his protective suit as he moved through the corridors. Marcus was 51 years old, a veteran of 15 years working on Council stations. He had seen equipment failures before. He had dealt with emergencies that would have sent other engineers into panic. But the moment he saw the readings on his scanner, his stomach dropped. The crack was spreading. The reactor was going critical. If the containment failed completely, the resulting explosion would destroy not just the reactor section but the entire station. 3,000 lives would end in a flash of nuclear fire. He called for his team. 11 other humans responded, the only engineers on duty willing to enter the contaminated zone. The Council species who staffed the station watched from safe distances, offering no assistance. Station protocol required them to remain at their posts during emergencies. It did not require them to risk their lives. The next 72 hours became a blur of exhaustion and desperation. Marcus and his team worked without sleep, without breaks, without any support from the station's non-human crew. They welded temporary patches over the spreading cracks. They rerouted coolant through backup systems that had not been tested in decades. They did everything possible to buy time while the automated repair systems struggled to catch up. But the crowd continued to grow. On the third day, Marcus realized there was only one option left. Someone would have to enter the reactor housing itself and apply a manual seal from the inside. The radiation levels, they were lethal. Anyone who went in would not come out. He did not ask for volunteers. He simply started walking toward the airlock. His team stopped him. They argued that he was too valuable, that his experience was needed to supervise the external repairs. 3 of them pushed past him and entered the reactor housing before he could stop them. Peter Coleman was 34 years old. He had 2 daughters back on Earth. Maria Santos was 28, engaged to be married to another engineer on a different station. Young Tony Russo was only 23, barely a year into his first posting away from home. They worked for 6 hours inside the reactor housing, sealing the breach millimeter by millimeter while radiation tore through their bodies. The automated systems finally stabilized at 15:23 station time. The station was saved. Peter, Maria, and Tony died within hours of completing their work. Their bodies were too damaged for medical intervention. 9 other members of the team suffered severe radiation sickness. 3 more would die over the following weeks from complications. 12 humans gave their lives to save Telos Station. The Council's official report arrived 2 weeks later. It was a standard document, the kind generated automatically whenever a significant incident occurred at a Council facility. Marcus read it 3 times, certain he must be missing something. The containment breach at Telos Station was mentioned in a single paragraph on page 47. The cause was listed as equipment malfunction. The resolution was described as successful repair through standard emergency protocols. The human casualties were noted in a footnote, classified as acceptable losses within projected parameters. No names. No acknowledgement. No gratitude. Marcus sent the report to Ambassador Samantha Price. She read it with growing disbelief, then demanded an audience with the High Assembly to address the matter. Her request was denied. She submitted a formal complaint through diplomatic channels. It was filed and forgotten. She pushed harder, speaking directly to Council delegates whenever she had the opportunity. The Valorian delegate finally responded during a routine trade negotiation. He seemed annoyed that she kept bringing up such a minor issue. Perhaps, he suggested, humans should simply be grateful for the opportunity to serve the greater galactic community. After all, provisional members could not expect the same recognition as full member species. Samantha returned to her quarters that night and sat in silence for a long time. She had spent her career believing in diplomacy. She had believed that patience and persistence would eventually lead to change. She had been wrong. The report reached Earth within days. It spread through the United Human Coalition like fire through dry grass. For 18 years, humanity had accepted their inferior status. They had worked, sacrificed, and died for a council that barely acknowledged their existence. They had told themselves that things would improve. Telos Station proved that nothing would ever change. President Christopher Allen convened an emergency session of the coalition leadership. The meeting lasted 14 hours. Director of Galactic Affairs, Laura Mitchell, presented data that her department had been quietly compiling for years. It showed every human contribution to the Council, every innovation claimed by other species, every life lost in service to civilizations that viewed humanity as disposable labor. The numbers were staggering. Humans had given everything. The Council had given nothing in return. When the debate finally ended, President Allen called for a vote. The question was simple. Should humanity withdraw from the Galactic Council? One by one, the representatives voted. There were no dissenting voices. There were no calls for more negotiation, more patience, more time. 18 years of silence had finally found its answer. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would leave the Galactic Council. They would not make demands. They would not issue threats. They would not fight. They would simply close the door and walk away. Ambassador Samantha Price transmitted the formal notice of withdrawal the following morning. It was brief, polite, and absolutely final. Humanity thanked the Council for the opportunity to serve. They wished all member species continued success. They would complete all current obligations before departing Council space. There was no anger in the message. There was no bitterness. There was only the quiet dignity of a species that had finally recognized its own worth. The Council received the notice and did nothing. They assumed it was a negotiating tactic, a bluff designed to extract better terms. Primitive species often made such gestures when they felt undervalued. They would learn soon enough that humanity was not bluffing. The withdrawal began without ceremony. There were no protests, no angry speeches, no dramatic confrontations. Human workers across the galaxy simply started preparing to leave. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Hayes received his reassignment orders on a quiet morning while the patrol squadron was docked at a refueling station. He read the message twice, then closed his communicator and returned to his duties. There was still work to be done before he could go home. He spent the next 3 weeks training his replacement, a young Kelani officer who had transferred from another squadron. The Kelani were not council members. They were one of the independent species who handled auxiliary duties that full members considered beneath them. Kevin taught the young officer everything he knew about communication protocols, fleet coordination, and the particular habits of Admiral Korath. The Admiral barely noticed the transition. He signed Kevin's discharge papers without reading them, assuming it was a routine transfer to another posting. Kevin saluted one final time, then walked off the ship without looking back. He had served under Korath for nearly 20 years. The Admiral never learned his name. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Human doctors completed their final surgeries and handed their patient files to new staff. Human engineers finished their current projects and documented their work for whoever came next. Human miners worked their last shifts, extracted their final loads of ore, and boarded transports back to Earth. They left nothing behind except their labor. Every personal item, every private note, every piece of human culture was packed and shipped home. The spaces they had occupied became empty, waiting for someone else to fill them. Dr. Natalie Hayes closed her research station on the frontier on a cold morning, when the local star was barely visible through the dust clouds. Her team had been working on advanced shield technology for 7 years. The project was nearly complete. A few more months and they would have developed a system capable of protecting vessels from the most intense stellar radiation in the known galaxy. She copied her personal files to a secure drive and wiped the station's servers clean. The official research data remained in the Council archives, but it was incomplete. The key insights, the breakthrough moments that turned theoretical physics into working technology, existed only in Natalie's private notes. Those notes were coming home with her. Her Valorian supervisor demanded to know what she was doing. Natalie explained calmly that all human personnel were withdrawing from Council space as per the official notice. The supervisor was confused. He had heard something about a withdrawal but assumed it was only affecting certain sectors. It is affecting everything, Natalie told him. Every human, everywhere. We are all going home. The supervisor contacted his superiors. They contacted their superiors. By the time the full scope of the withdrawal became clear to Council leadership, thousands of humans had already departed. The Council's initial response was dismissive. High Counselor Varath received briefings about the human withdrawal, but gave them little attention. Provisional species sometimes went through phases of discontent. They would struggle on their own for a few months, then return seeking readmission. It had happened before with other young species. What Varath failed to understand was how deeply humanity had integrated into Council infrastructure. For 18 years, humans had been filling the gaps that no one else wanted to fill. They had taken the dangerous jobs, the boring jobs, the essential jobs that kept civilization running. No one had tracked their contributions, because no one had cared enough to notice. The first problems appeared within weeks of the withdrawal's completion. Medical stations along the Orion corridor reported critical staffing shortages. Human doctors and nurses had comprised nearly 60% of the personnel at those facilities. Their replacements, mostly Xanthari volunteers, discovered that the work was far more demanding than they had expected. The Xanthari were not suited for long shifts or high-stress environments. Patient care suffered immediately. Mining operations on the outer colonies faced similar difficulties. Human workers had developed specialized techniques for extracting rare minerals from unstable asteroid fields. These techniques had never been formally documented because no one had asked the humans to write them down. When replacement crews attempted the same operations, accidents began occurring at an alarming rate. The jump drive efficiency across the entire Council fleet dropped by 40% within the first year. Human engineers had been making continuous improvements to propulsion systems for nearly 2 decades. Small adjustments, minor optimizations, tiny tweaks that individually meant nothing but collectively transformed the speed and reliability of interstellar travel. Without human maintenance, those improvements began reversing themselves. Vessels that once crossed the galaxy in weeks now took months. Trade routes collapsed. Supply chains failed. Economic output plummeted. High Counselor Varath finally began paying attention when the reports reached his desk showing the full extent of the damage. He demanded explanations from his advisors. They struggled to provide them. No one had realized how much the Council depended on human labor. The humans had never complained about their treatment. They had never demanded recognition for their contributions. They had simply done the work, quietly and efficiently, for 18 years. Their absence created a vacuum that no other species seemed capable of filling. Meanwhile, Earth was transforming. Freed from Council restrictions, humanity poured its energy into independent development. The 3 star systems they had been permitted to colonize became staging grounds for expansion into unclaimed space. Within 3 years, human vessels were exploring regions of the galaxy that Council maps had never charted. The technology that had been funneled into Council projects now served human interests exclusively. Engineers who had spent their careers improving alien ships began designing human vessels from scratch. Scientists who had watched their discoveries, claimed by Valorian supervisors, now published their work under their own names. Kevin Hayes received a promotion and a new assignment commanding a patrol vessel protecting human colonial convoys. His crew was entirely human for the first time in his career. He found himself smiling more often than he had in years. Natalie Hayes resumed her SHIELD research in a new facility orbiting Mars. Without Valorian interference, her work progressed rapidly. Within 2 years, her team had developed a fully functional system that exceeded anything the Council possessed. Across human space, similar stories unfolded. The species that had spent 18 years serving others was finally serving itself. The results were extraordinary. That the Galactic Council watched from afar, slowly realizing that humanity was not coming back. The primitive species, They had dismissed as disposable labor was building something new, and they were building it without asking permission from anyone. The collapse of the Galactic Council did not happen all at once. It crept forward slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. Each day brought new problems. Each month revealed new weaknesses. Each year stripped away another layer of the great civilization that had endured for millions of years. The medical crisis along the bends. Orion Corridor reached catastrophic levels within 18 months of humanity's departure. Patient mortality rates had tripled, then quadrupled. Species that had relied on human doctors for treatment began seeking alternatives. Some turned to independent medical facilities outside council space. Others simply stopped using the corridor altogether, finding longer but safer routes for their travels. The mining colonies on the outer rim shut down one by one. Rare minerals that had once flowed freely into council markets became scarce. Manufacturing industries dependent on those materials faced shortages they could not overcome. Prices for common goods skyrocketed. Economic stability that had lasted for centuries began crumbling. High Councillor Vareth convened emergency sessions of the Assembly. His advisors presented reports filled with numbers that made no sense to beings who had never paid attention to the details of their own civilization. How could the departure of one primitive species cause such widespread damage? The humans had only been council members for 18 years. The council had existed for millions. The answer, when it finally became clear, was painfully simple. The council had grown comfortable. Over countless generations, the elder species had stopped doing the difficult work themselves. They had delegated the unpleasant tasks to younger species, to provisional members, to anyone willing to accept poor conditions. In exchange for the privilege of participation, humanity had been the latest in a long line of such species. But unlike their predecessors, humans have been remarkably good at their jobs. They had not simply filled positions. They had improved them. They had innovated, optimized, and transformed every system they touched. When they left, they took that improvement with them. The council was left with infrastructure designed for human efficiency, but no humans to maintain it. The Valorians attempted to address the crisis by recruiting workers from other provisional species. The Morthani, a reptilian race that had joined the council recently, seemed promising candidates. But the Morthani proved unable to match human productivity. They worked slowly, made frequent errors, and required constant supervision. Other species fared even worse. The Xanthari abandoned their medical positions entirely after a series of high-profile patient deaths. The Kelani, who had never been council members, refused recruitment offers with barely concealed amusement. They had watched how the council treated its junior partners. They had no desire to experience that treatment themselves. Meanwhile, humanity flourished beyond anything the Prest Council could have imagined. The Free Stellar Compact began as a simple trade agreement between Earth and 3 independent species who had approached human colonies seeking partners. The Kelani came first, offering raw materials in exchange for human medical expertise. The Vortex followed, interested in human propulsion technology. The Remari arrived last, bringing advanced computing systems that complemented human engineering perfectly. Within 5 years, the Compact had grown to include 15 species. Within 10 years, that number had more than doubled. Each new member brought unique strengths to the alliance. Each new partnership created opportunities that benefited everyone involved. The key difference between the Compact and the Council was simple but profound. Every member species was treated as an equal. There were no provisional memberships, no restricted rights, no hierarchies based on how long a species had been traveling between stars. Decisions were made collectively. Resources were shared fairly. Contributions were acknowledged and celebrated. The Compact operated on principles. of mutual respect that the Council had never even considered. Kevin Hayes rose through the ranks of the Compact's defense force until he commanded an entire fleet protecting the Alliance's borders. His ships were crewed by beings from a dozen different species, all working together with an efficiency the Council vessels could not match. He had spent 20 years serving Valorians who barely knew his name. Now he led missions where every crew member was valued. His sister, Natalie, became one of the most celebrated scientists in human history. Her shield technology protected compact vessels across the galaxy. Her research teams included brilliant minds from species the Council had never bothered to contact. She finally received credit for her work, recognition that arrived decades late, but was no less meaningful for the delay. The Council attempted to counter the Compact's growth through diplomatic pressure. They warned independent species that associating with humans would have consequences. They threatened trade restrictions and territorial disputes. The threats accomplished nothing. The independent species had watched the Council's decline. They had seen how the great civilization treated its junior members. They had observed the chaos that followed humanity's departure. They had no desire to join an organization that was clearly dying. Some Council members began defecting. The Partheni, a species that had been provisional members for over a century, announced their withdrawal following humanity's example. They cited the same concerns humans had raised years earlier: the lack of recognition, the unfair treatment, the endless promises of improvement that never materialized. 3 more species followed the Partheni within the next year. Then 5 more. Then 8. High Councilor Verith watched his great civilization shrinking. The 47-member species that had once made the Council the dominant force in the galaxy were now barely half that number. The grand halls of the Assembly echoed with emptiness where representatives had once debated the fate of countless worlds. The Valorians, oldest and proudest of the Council species, refused to acknowledge the disaster unfolding around them. They insisted that the situation was temporary. They maintained that the departed species would eventually return. They could not accept that their million-year dominance of galactic civilization was ending, but the numbers told a different story. Trade revenues had collapsed by 70%. Military strength had deteriorated to the point where Council patrols could no longer protect their own borders. Technological development had stagnated completely. The Galactic Council was dying. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, humanity was building something better. They had proven a truth that the elder species had forgotten long ago. Power does not come from conquest or domination. It comes from the willing cooperation of beings who choose to work together for mutual benefit. The Council had taken humanity for granted. They had dismissed human contributions as insignificant. They had treated an entire species as disposable servants. Now, they were paying the price for that arrogance, and the bill was far from settled. High Councilor Verith had ruled the Galactic Council for 300 years. He had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. He had navigated crises that would have destroyed lesser leaders. He had always believed that the Council was eternal, that the great civilization built by his ancestors would endure long after his own passing. Now he stood on the observation deck of his diplomatic cruiser, watching Earth grow larger through the viewport, and wondered if he was witnessing the end of everything he had known. The journey to the Sol system had taken 4 months. Council vessels no longer traveled as quickly as they once had. The jump drives that human engineers had optimized for decades were failing across the fleet. Replacement parts were scarce. Qualified technicians were scarcer. Varath's cruiser had been the pride of the Valorian diplomatic corps when it was commissioned 2 centuries ago. Now it seemed small and outdated compared to the sleek human vessels that escorted it through the system. Those ships moved with a grace and speed the Council technology could no longer match. Earth, itself had transformed beyond recognition. The planet Varath had visited 18 years ago, before humanity's departure, had been a modest world still recovering from centuries of self-inflicted environmental damage. The world he saw now was thriving. Orbital stations circled the planet in precise formations. Ships launched and landed in constant streams. The signs of a civilization reaching toward greatness were everywhere. President Andrew Patterson received the High Counselor in Unity Hall, a building constructed specifically to host diplomatic meetings with the Free Stellar Compact's many allied species. The structure was enormous, dwarfing anything the Council had ever built. Its architecture reflected dozens of different cultural influences, a symbol of the cooperation that defined the compact. Foreign Secretary Lisa Chun sat beside the president, her expression neutral but attentive. Behind them, representatives from 6 different compact member species observed the meeting in silence. The Kelani ambassador, the Vortex trade minister, the Ramari science director, others whose names Varath did not know. The meeting began with formal pleasantries that meant nothing to anyone present. Varath endured them patiently, waiting for the moment when he could deliver the offer he had spent months preparing. When that moment finally arrived, he spoke carefully. The Galactic Council wished to extend an invitation to humanity. Full membership, with complete voting rights. Unrestricted colonization privileges across any unclaimed territory. Access to all Council technology without limitation. Recognition of all past human contributions, with formal apologies for any previous oversights. The terms were extraordinary. They represented everything humanity had been denied during their 18 years as provisional members. They represented a complete reversal of Council policy toward younger species. They represented an admission of failure that Varath had never imagined himself making. President Patterson listened without interruption. When Varath finished, the president glanced at Secretary Chun. She gave a slight nod. The president turned back to face the High Counselor. "Thank you for traveling so far to deliver this offer personally," Patterson said. "We understand the significance of what you are proposing. Please give us a moment to consult." The president leaned toward Secretary Chun. They exchanged whispered words that Varath could not hear. The compact representatives behind them remained perfectly still. After several minutes, President Patterson straightened in his chair. His expression was kind but firm. "High Counselor, we have considered your offer carefully. We appreciate the Council's willingness to extend full membership to humanity. However, after thorough discussion, we must respectfully decline." Varath felt something cold settle in his chest. He had expected negotiation. He had prepared counteroffers and compromises. He had not prepared for simple refusal. "May I ask why?" He managed. Patterson nodded slowly. 20 years ago, we would have accepted these terms without hesitation. We wanted nothing more than to be treated as equals among the stars. But the Council made it clear that equality was not possible for a species as young as ours. So we left. The president gestured toward the representatives seated behind him. Since then, we have built something new. The Free Stellar Compact now includes 38 member species, all treated as equals from the moment they join. We have no provisional memberships. We have no hierarchies based on age or technological development. We have only partners who choose to work together for mutual benefit. Secretary Chun spoke next. Her voice was gentle, but carried an edge of steel beneath the surface. We have achieved everything the Council denied us, and more. Our technology exceeds Council standards in most areas. Our economy is growing while the Council's contracts. Our alliances are strengthening while Council membership shrinks. She paused, meeting Varath's eyes directly. We have no reason to return to an organization that treated us as servants for 18 years. We have no desire to validate an institution that is clearly failing. And frankly, We have no need for anything the Council can offer. Varys sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of centuries pressed down on his shoulders. He had come to Earth expecting to negotiate humanity's return. He was leaving with nothing. The Valorians will remember this, he said quietly. It was not a threat, merely a statement of fact. President Patterson smiled, and there was no malice in the expression. We hope they do, he replied. Perhaps they will learn from it. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Varys returned to his cruiser and began the long journey back to Council space. He had failed in his mission. The report he would deliver to the Assembly would seal the Council's fate. Behind him, Earth continued to thrive. Human vessels launched toward distant stars. Compact ships from dozens of species docked at orbital stations. The alliance that had grown from humanity's departure now stretched across vast regions of the galaxy. In the years that followed, the Galactic Council continued its decline. More species withdrew. More systems fell silent. More of the grand civilization that had lasted for millions of years crumbled into dust. 20 years after humanity's departure, only 19 species remained in the Council. The great assembly halls stood mostly empty. The trade routes that had connected thousands of worlds carried only a fraction of their former traffic. Admiral Kevin Hayes commanded the exploration vessel Horizon when it discovered the first evidence of civilizations beyond the known galaxy. His sister Natalie provided the shield technology that made such distant travel possible. Their crew included beings from 15 different species, all working together as equals. The Admiral stood on his bridge as the Horizon prepared to jump into completely uncharted space. A young ensign asked him about the old days, about serving under the Council before the withdrawal. Kevin smiled, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Some battles are won by refusing to fight, he said. Some farewells are made by simply closing the door. The Horizon jumped forward, carrying humanity and its allies toward a future they had built themselves. Behind them, the Galactic Council faded into history, a monument to the arrogance of those who believe power comes from dominion rather than partnership. Humanity had never fired a shot. They had never raised their voices in anger. They had simply walked away. That silence echoed across the galaxy for generations to come.